Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Adobe Educators Conference. I'm Caitlin Hartley. I'm one of the Customer Success Managers here at Adobe within the ANZ Education team. We're so excited to see you here today. Looks like we have about 40 people already joining from the plenary, and probably more will continue to join. But I'll go ahead and introduce our fantastic keynote speaker today. It's my pleasure to introduce Cherie Diaz. She's the Executive Director of Education Innovation at Western Sydney University, which I work closely with as a creative campus partner. Cherie is really a driving force behind initiatives in microcredentials, ed tech, digital skills development, and brings deep expertise from her roles across government, industry, and education. Her keynote today is titled Future Ready Learners, Embedding Digital and Transferable Skills in Tertiary Education. So she'll explore a bit about how we can better prepare students for the rapidly evolving workforce by embedding creativity, collaboration, and adaptability into curriculum design. So we're very excited to hear from Cherie this morning. As I mentioned, feel free to use that chat to ask your questions, and I'll pass those along to Cherie either during or at the conclusion of her plenary. And yes, please give a emoji clapping hands to Cherie as we welcome her. Thank you, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, Caitlin. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for sharing your Thursday morning with me, or if you're watching afterwards, thanks for jumping back on. As Caitlin said, I work at Western Sydney Uni, but for a bit of broader context, I do have a background across secondary, vocational, higher ed, and lifelong learning as well. So some of the examples I'll talk to today in the context that I give, I do draw upon that experience as part of my role at Western Sydney University. I'll also acknowledge that I do advise the Future Skills Organisation, which is one of the 10 jobs and skills councils looking after finance, business and technology training packages in VET. So I have that opportunity to be across all of the movements in the vocational sector as well. I do have slides to share. There are a few of them. I'll try and cover as much as possible, but as I've said to Caitlin, I'm happy for them to be shared after the session, or if you reach out, I can share them directly with you as well. Before I jump in and share my slides, I will acknowledge that I am joining this session from Sydney, the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So without further ado, I'll share my screen now and we'll get into it. So what does it actually mean to be future-ready learners or preparing future-ready learners? For a bit of context, I'll cover what I think that means and particularly some of the global skills trends. I'll try and bring it home to an Australian context, acknowledging that it is a broad context and relevant application is important as well. I've included a number of real-world examples, and where possible, I've also tried to include links where you can access those after the date as well. And then I'll close out with some considerations and recommendations. So, what does it mean to be future ready? I guess in preparing for this presentation, one of the things that I reflect on is, when I graduated from my undergrad in 2003, at that point, I was planning to be a high school teacher, and I did for a number of years. But the benchmark or the estimation at that point is across one's working life, it was expected that we would have 3 to 7 jobs. Skip forward to 2025, that estimation now is 18 jobs across an individual's working life. So there's been a significant shift in terms of the breadth of roles, industries, and type of skills that an individual will need, as well as acknowledging that the average working age and duration has expanded as well, and will likely increase expanding across our lifetime. In addition to that, we've seen shifts that include greater mixture of full-time and portfolio-based careers as part of that. And I'm fortunate, as part of my role, I have what I call my day job at the university, as well as a couple of board and advisory roles. And that's more and more becoming common practice as well. But within the context of Future Ready, I think it's important that when we, from an education perspective, use references such as Future Ready or the workforce of tomorrow, actually looking at the grounding and the skills that I'll walk through in a second, they're not really that new. Yes, there's pace of change and the speed of technology evolution that has to be taken into consideration, and is definitely throwing some challenges for the sector. But realistically, the concept of T-shaped graduate, or in the instance of the image I've got up on the screen, T-shaped people, it's not a new concept. But really what we're looking at here is what are the discipline-specific expertise that we need to support our students in developing, as well as those broader general or collaborative transferable skills that are needed as well. Within that context, I'll then shift to a couple of frameworks that I think are handy and worthwhile going back to if you're not already across them, before looking at some of those insights for the skills that are increasingly becoming prioritised and important across the range of programs that both vocational and higher education institutions deliver. So on your screen, you'll see reference to two frameworks. The first of those is DigComp. So DigComp is a European-based framework, and really its core guiding premise is to help support and identify the elements that are needed for an individual to be digitally competent. And on the right-hand side is the framework produced by JISC, which is a UK-based organisation that many higher ed professionals and academics would be familiar with. And the reason I bring them both up is, one, to show the complementary elements between the two frameworks, but also to show that actually we're walking in the same direction in terms of the range of core digital literacy skills that are important for both students and for working professionals. But I also include it because we sometimes, or I in particular sometimes, observe an assumption that is made that when students come into vocational and higher education, that they are digitally fluent learners, particularly if they are current school leavers or recent school leavers. And some of the data points that I'm across, and particularly from a Western Sydney context, having seen the data that was produced and the insights out of COVID, we can't assume that. So I think starting from that baseline is really important in how things are shaped and the types of skills and programs that we develop and deliver for our students. The second one that I'll call out is, again, not a new framework, but more about bringing home the fact that when we talk about transferable skills, the concept that it's a layering on of everything that we have to develop, versus quite often in my experience, it's about being able to identify, map, and support both our staff and students in understanding, being able to recognise and talk about the skills that they've developed through their learning experience, and the ability to show how they can apply it in context, whether that's a portfolio of evidence or being able to talk about problems that they've solved in practice as well. So I think that's an important context, is this isn't and shouldn't be about what else do we squeeze in. Actually, my preference is to look at what are we already doing, and are we articulating and evidencing those skills that we're developing in our programs. With that in mind, I thought it was also important to look at what are the global skills trends, and then I'll move into the Australian context. Now, the World Economic Forum Future of Jobs report, I always find a useful starting point. And if you haven't checked out their website more recently, the interactive components of their data has continued to advance over the last couple of years. And I really think it's worth bookmarking from an access point perspective. On the right-hand side, you'll see a couple of things. One is starting to use the terminology of core skills rather than soft or transferable. And I think that's a great shift in how we language the types of skills that most learners and workers will need across their working life. But to the left, I also thought it was important to be able to showcase that when we look at the shifts in the prioritization of skills, that actually there's been consistent themes across regular reporting periods. So the 2015 and the 2020 skills, actually, there might be some reprioritization, but there's also core skills and consistent skills across that period as well. And the reason I highlight that is one of the complexities, having worked across vet and higher ed, of course, is looking at the frequency with which we can update and refresh the curriculum as part of that. So being able to map to those skills that are core and consistent while enabling flexibility to adapt or have different use cases and activities built in, I think is an important part of how we're able to move with the pace of change happening, particularly from a technology, digital and AI skills perspective. The other component that I'll call out within that is looking at which skills are on the rise. And this isn't by a specific industry, occupation, or program of work. And I do think that context is important. But it is no surprise that elements such as AI, big data, technology literacy have continued to increase and are forecasted to increase over the next 5 years. But the other one for me that has been a great acknowledgement in the last few years and will continue to take precedence is the increased prioritization of creative thinking and that ability to be able to conceptualize and effectively communicate one's ideas, thoughts, and innovation is a great skill, not only a great skill to have, but important in how we weave that throughout the learning experiences for our students. That being said, I also think it's worth acknowledging that we are seeing in certain pockets that the pace of change and technology innovation is impacting some entry-level career opportunities for students currently studying, whether that's at a vocational or a higher education level of study. And with particular reference to the US market, there has been noted decline in entry-level jobs. And one of the challenges I think that is presenting for the sector is how do we start to build that adaptability of our students, but also preparing students for not just their first role, but what's that next role after that as well. I'm conscious of getting to some of the examples, so I'll skip through some of this in a little bit quicker pace. From an Australian context, what has been really clear over the last 10 years is persistent skills shortages. Now, we have seen some stabilisation of those in the last 2 years, but in areas such as health and care, education, and construction, they are persistent skill shortages. Within that, though, we also have some regional specific areas that I think are worth being across and highlighting. The first of those being that our AI literacy awareness and level of training, both within current students and existing workforce, is actually one of the lowest from an OECD country perspective. And that's a component to consider as to how do we build curiosity, engagement, and confidence in engaging with the tools so that people are actually able to articulate what they can do within a workplace setting. That being said, AI literacy from a LinkedIn perspective is now the #1 most sought after skill. From a global perspective, I wanted to talk through a couple of examples, and then I'll get into some Western Sydney University examples about how we're approaching both digital and transferable skills or core skills embedding within our programs. From a global example, and I did try and take into context the breadth of people joining today's session, and I'm happy to provide links to these as well. But the first one I'll call out is another WSU university. That's Weber State in the US. They're also an Adobe partner, but I think if you haven't already come across their digital skills offering and had a look at the strategies and the ways that they're supporting staff in order to be able to support students, it's definitely worth a look. And in my experience, Stephanie, who heads up the digital fluence faculty at Weber, is not only a passionate advocate in this space, but always really generous with her time and her insights. The other one I'll call out is a Canadian-based example, and that's the Transferable Skills program in Ontario. And whilst it's starting at a high school perspective, it's targeting building out an embedding of transferable skills within curriculum from ages 14 to 19 with a system-based approach. More locally, the Future Skills organisation recently has launched a program of work and engagement to look at how do they support vocational education and trainers in developing confidence and capability with AI as well. So if you're not connected with that, I would definitely suggest connecting with that team. And the last one is more program specific, but Keele University is what I think a highlight in how they're approaching digital and workplace skills, specifically within the nursing programs, and building not only confidence, but the sense of readiness for nursing students to engage in their practical components of their program as well. From a Western Sydney University perspective, I'll give a bit of context for those that aren't as familiar with our university as I am. But we are obviously based in Western Sydney, but Western Sydney is a very large region and a very diverse region. So we do have 13 campuses, predominantly across Greater Western Sydney, but we have also campuses in Vietnam, Indonesia, and from next year we'll have one in India as well. We support a very diverse range of students across our 45,000 plus, mostly in undergraduate, but postgrad, vocational, as well as English language and diploma foundation programs. Our students represent more than 170 nationalities. We also have a significantly high proportion of students who are first in family, which gives us a really rich and diverse body of students that we are supporting, but a great opportunity to look at the range of ways that we support those students' needs. As part of the launch of our new strategic plan, it was great to see one of the shifts that we've put in is moving from a digital adopters to a digital leaders strategy. And core to that is building the digital skills and capability needed for both our staff and our students. And with that in mind, I'll talk through a couple of examples that hopefully are relevant or suggest some ways that you might approach digital and core skills development for your students and institutions. So the first piece I'll talk through is a couple of the frameworks that we use. On the left, you'll see a way that I explain how we approach our micro-credential development at the university. And why I've put this together and used it within the university is, having come from across different areas of the education sector, one of the elements over the last 5 years that I think has been core has been developing in our academic staff not just awareness, but comfort in being able to use the word skills, because in Australia, from a historic context perspective, we've tended to define vocational as skills-based and higher ed as knowledge or theoretical-based. And actually, that's not the case. We develop skills across all levels of our programs and across all levels of the Australian qualification framework. But what we use this table for is to be able to show that alignment between learning outcomes, skills, so that both staff and students and employers who are using those micro-credentials to recognise the skills of learners, to understand that they work in step with each other, but also the importance of evidence of learning in practice, the ability to apply those skills, but also the importance of helping students or learners, depending on whether they're enrolled in programs or not, to use the language that will be important in both applying for jobs, but being able to reflect on their own skills development process. On the right-hand side, what you'll see is what we call the learning wave. And it's the pedagogical framework that we use across not just our micro-credentials, but a number of our programs. And that's been created as a Creative Commons resource. So please feel free to use it or to explore the ways that we're not just introducing new concepts and capabilities with students, but also scaffolding their application of those skills in practice and reinforcing the importance of reflection throughout one's learning journey as well. The second example I have to call out, and a number of the examples and templates that I'll reference are using Adobe Express for a couple of reasons. One, we are an Adobe Creative Campus, but also because of the way that we've been able to work with Caitlin and the Adobe team to look at the applications and the ease with which we can move between both a subject and a program level to support academic staff and students in developing not just their digital and creative skills, but more broadly, the core skills that are needed across one's lifetime. So the first piece I'll call out is the ability for our students to have a central point of place to explore what's possible to support them, and even down to which of the tools are best placed to support their needs. More recently, and as recently as this week, we've also moved to actually pinning particular templates within Adobe Express for our students to take away a barrier to their engaging and a curiosity for what is possible from a digital skills and a digital communication perspective as well. So those templates are now available for all of our students to start to explore what's possible, but also to alleviate some of that concern that they have to know everything from day one. The next example I'll talk to is our digital storytelling guides. Now, this is actually a bank of tools that have been rolled out and built by our Engage teaching project, with a real focus on building engagement and belonging with our students from day one. And those tools are designed so that they can be remixed and applied within different subjects. But the core focus is that the students feel like their teachers or tutors know them and supports them getting to be comfortable in expressing them in creative tools and ways of engaging with the curriculum as well. It's also a great way for our academic staff to understand the goals and what's driving students throughout their learning process. The other tools that we use is really applied in a range of different contexts. So the Academy at Western supports up to 1,200 students each year, but in this particular one, it's part of our Citizen Scholar program, where not only is it about understanding social impact, but really importantly is building the confidence and capability for students to understand the degree of impact that they can have locally and globally within communities as well. The other example that I think is a great one is a learning passport. So in this particular context, it's being used within our psychology program, where in order to meet accreditation standards, once a student completes, they're required to demonstrate and build out evidence of how they're able to show those skills, knowledge, and capabilities in practice. What's great, though, is that our students, as they're working through that and doing those activities and assessments throughout their program, are being supported to do their learning passport in step with their experiences, so they don't get to the end and then have to try and collate that evidence or to consider or reflect, what exactly am I able to demonstrate in this regard? The last example I'll talk is more holistic in terms of a specific subject that went live this semester, which is creative communications, mastering Adobe Express. Of course, this subject it does heavily rely on Adobe Express and was developed in partnership with the Adobe team. But what's great about this is not only is it supported through our School of Humanities Communication Arts, but it's also been designed as an interdisciplinary subject that students from across other schools are able to engage with as well. And the fact that students get industry certifications as part of the program, and it's embedded as well. Conscious of time, I'm going to quickly jump to some considerations and recommendations. So the first one I'll talk through is approaches. And the easiest way is to look at how do you bolt on, particularly from a digital skills perspective. And I think in some contexts, like AI literacy or responding to quick changes, it's a needed approach in some instances. But realistically, to get the breadth of understanding and the comfort that we're producing future-ready learners, it does need to be embedded within the subjects and programs that we're delivering. But I do call out the difference between embedding and integrating. And what I mean by that is each institution, and Western being one of those, is at different stages of embedding core and digital skills within their programs. But integrating is a more holistic process, in my view, of how is it integrated across the entire learning experience or the entire product that that student is undertaking at that time. Definitely considerations are faculty capacity and confidence, allowing space to explore and be curious and to build those skills in faculty is really important in order to be able to roll this out at scale. Curriculum overload is a concern, and it's a valid one, because we need to be mindful of adding things in versus actually sometimes we need to take things out or reshape how we're doing things. Assessment authenticity, I know, is a ongoing discussion in every institution, but I also see this as an opportunity to leverage the tools as well as to look at how we're mapping and articulating those skills that are being developed across the programs, as well as student perception, that they see this as core to not just the program, but the careers that they're going into as well. And lastly, I'll call out some recommendations. So I definitely think it is worth starting with understanding what are we currently doing within each of our programs and mapping those, rather than assuming that we're not already doing it. Where possible, embed, don't bolt on. That being said, I also do work in the frame of mind that there's what do we embed versus offering complementary to for our students as part of their learning experience. Western has a partnership pedagogy strategy or framework that we use, and we are fortunate to work across a number of our industry and community partners to support us in this process. Scaffolding is important, but the other piece I would say is starting small, make sure you're measuring impact, and then look at scaling fast. And what I mean by starting small as well is it's much easier to work with those educators and staff who are ready to move now and build up a community of action around you to support that process. On that note, I'll stop. I'm conscious that I've hit time, but if you want to reach out, please feel free to do so via LinkedIn or send me an email, and look forward to chatting further. Thank you.
Thank you, Cherie. Thanks everyone for joining. We do have one question in the chat from Troy. How would you define AI literacy, Cherie? And could you maybe expand on this term?
Yeah,
and what are
sure.
the specifics?
Yes. So for me, AI is a digital tool and capability. So I do ground it within digital skills. And then AI literacy is about building understanding of what is artificial intelligence, particularly what is generative AI, and the different frameworks, concepts, and ways that it can or should be incorporated, not just within a learning experience, but also understanding the workplace change that is happening as well. So hopefully that answers that. If you're interested, I'm happy to point you to some of the resources that I use from an AI literacy perspective as well.
Great, thank you. So many great nuggets and food for thought in that presentation and examples across the different tertiary sectors. So I hope that inspired you and you are excited to dive into some of these workshops this afternoon. The conference link is there in the chat for you to check out the workshops throughout the day. Our next one starts at 10 a.m., our first workshop block. So thank you for joining this keynote. Thank you again, Cherie, for your time and your energy. And with that, we'll leave you to your next session. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.